Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Another one with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update. I don't know what part thereof. On the 29th of August 2024, this is concerning military aid. I'll have to leave my geopolitics to tomorrow. Do a 2-day roundup on that because too much content, etc, etc. We're going to start with the, instead of talking about individual countries giving stuff to Ukraine, let's talk about some general ideas to do with Ukraine's ability to strike deep into Russia, the provision of weaponry, etc, etc. So the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, the best path to peace is for the West to continue arming Ukraine, he has said. So that is a not unheard of position. We've said this a number of times, that actually the quickest way, the most efficient way, in fact, the way that we'll see the fewest deaths will be to give Ukraine everything it needs to win a war. Rather than having a long protracted war, you have a much quicker end to the war because they completely defeat Russia. And in the long run, that will save lives. Quote, that is the reality of the situation, he said. Ukraine has been able to create instability and mistrust in Russia. That is always good from a military strategic point of view, he added. So hopefully the Finnish leader will continue to support Ukraine in that kind of way. We know that Finland is helping with military aid, but doesn't admit the military aid it gives. For example, the Finnish PSH-74, this is a Grodzig. It's interesting because this is a self-propelled gun from Soviet time, so I don't know what the Finnish must have been closer aligned to the Soviet military, or with using their military equipment previously. Anyway, this is in the service of the Ukrainians now, so the Finnish are giving things. We aren't necessarily finding out about them. They keep pretty quiet about what they give. Right, moving on. So fairly similar kind of ideas here. We had General Breedlove saying, if we keep doing what we're doing, Ukraine will eventually lose. I said that yesterday. Well, I reported him saying that because right now we are purposefully not giving Ukraine what they need to win. Jay in Kiev said, at this point, the Biden administration deserves 100% of the blame about what's happening in Ukraine. So here's someone who's no fan of Trump, but giving some real hard times to Biden, particularly the kind of Jake Sullivan anti-escalation wing. Ukraine could destroy all of Russia's bombers and missile launchers, but it's only the US that's preventing it. And yes, Trump would be 10 times worse. He says, Ukraine battle map adds, Ukraine will lose a war if the US continues its current policies. US is sending over 50% less military aid monthly to Ukraine than they did in 2022 and 2023. They're mainly sending the bare minimum ammunition. This has led to Ukraine not being able to stop Russian advances. Ukraine is now losing more land every week than they have since March 2022. They're not getting any new Bradleys, Strikers, artillery and tanks. US also appears to significantly decrease the shipment of ATACMS missiles, glide bombs, as well as most other military aid. I don't know if there's a cautious approach to giving aid to Ukraine from the US because they are unsure of the outcome of November elections. I think one of the positions is that if Trump wins, then that's the end of aid to Ukraine. So what they've got now, they need to eke out for as long as possible until November. And if they win in November, it's like, okay, brilliant, give it all. And then go for, I mean, it depends on what happens in Congress. But actually, there's a pretty good bipartisan support for aid to Ukraine. And I think if Trump doesn't get in November, Trump will be jettisoned by the GOP. It has to be, because he would have failed too much in 2 elections in a row, and also down ticket. So anyone he endorses is generally not succeeding in getting voted in at the moment. So if that happens, then you might just get a greater unification, especially if they decide to replace Trump with someone who is more kind of Reagan-esque. You might get a unification around foreign policy issues like Ukraine. And it just might be like, okay, back to normal, bosh, here you go. But until that moment, with the election hanging in the balance, according to many, with people not sure about what's going to happen, you've got a very cautious approach to giving aid to Ukraine. And it is a political decision, but you can understand that, because if this is the last that the Ukraine are going to get, then you kind of want it to last for as long as possible, or you just give it all to them now, but then there's no kind of sustainability to, say, ammunition. So different theories there. Let me know what you think as ever. Right, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has urged allies to lift restrictions on long-range strikes into Russia. He also sought NATO support for Poland to intercept Russian missiles over Ukraine, stressing this wouldn't make the countries involved a party to the war. Indeed, he has said here, if decisions are made, Ukraine is successful on the ground. If not, don't blame Ukraine, blame yourself. We have once again demonstrated that those who talk about the fear of escalation mostly use this argument only to avoid making the decisions Ukraine needs. So he's being very strong in talking against the anti-escalation rationale that's employed by, for example, the Biden administration by and large. Now, talking about the restriction of the US on Ukraine being able to strike deep into Russia, the Netherlands say they did not restrict the use of Ukrainian armed forces F-16s on the condition that they would be used in compliance with the laws of war. And that has been set out supposedly to include being able to strike deep into Russia. So Petr Pavel, the Czech president, said Ukraine must decide for itself how to use the F-16, in particular for attacks on the Russian Federation. He emphasised that according to Article 51 of the UN Charter, Ukraine must dispose of Western weapons at its discretion in response to aggression. So there you go. Now, Gabrielis Landsbergis, the foreign minister from Lithuania, is a massive supporter of Ukraine, said we cannot allow Russian bombers to be better protected than Ukrainian civilians are. Let's ask ourselves if we are being honest about how much we actually support Ukraine. So should we listen to him?
Even though it sounds like a joke, but we're protecting Russian skies more. Russian planes are better protected by the Western guarantees than Ukrainians. We have to ask
such a good point.
The question, aren't we ourselves a part of this problem? So far, no Patriot batteries that have been promised to Ukraine in Washington have been delivered. No new ammunition packages have been delivered since June. The eastern flank is worried, because we all understand if Ukrainians are not getting the assistance that they have been promised, that is a door open for Putin to continue. This is very unfortunate, but we need to start asking very specific questions when the promises are being made. Because it turns out that when a country X promises an equipment Y, it appears that the equipment Y is unsuitable, is unusable, it needs repairs, it would take a very long time for it to be delivered. And as for example, during our discussions with Ukrainian friends, we find out that certain equipment that has been promised last year will only be delivered in 2027, even though the calculations and the promises and the announcements and the headlines have been in 2023. And as you know, Putin has reliable friends. North Koreans, Iranians are able to resupply Russia with what they promised. So there's this difference. In some cases, we are creating a narrative, a good story to tell our citizens, that we are fighters for what's good. But when it comes to deliveries, well, the story sometimes is very different. But there's another message, that basically Europe is prepared to lose. And I really hope that those people who make decisions not to provide Ukraine what is promised, they are preparing for the next stage of war. Because that will come. There's no way around this.
I would like him to be heard on every single TV station, and I would like that to be heard on every single news bulletin in the world. Gabrielis Landsbergis is brilliant. He actually, I saw it. I shared it with you. He was on Fox somewhat recently, saying similar things. That's really forceful, though, what he's saying there, and absolutely bang on. Absolutely bang on. Right, the European Union will accelerate the delivery of military aid and energy equipment to support Ukraine's energy system, according to Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba again. Earlier, Kuleba urged the EU to finally provide Kyiv with the promised Patriot systems. Positive news is expected very soon. Well, yep, good. And as Gabrielis Landsbergis, none of the ones that were promised at that NATO summit have yet been delivered. Now, the new Ukrainian ballistic missile has a range of up to 600 to 700 kilometers, according to Podolyak. So that is the new, possibly called the Hrim-2. That would be great because it could well strike Moscow, as according to that infographic. That would be, if you watch my live chat with Daniela from Turchny, we talked about how there's the Electrostyle, Electrostyle Forge munitions factory or barrel factory, or a factory that can make barrels, makes all sorts of things, that is situated there. That would be an absolutely prime target. Okay, I call on all the countries that promised Patriot systems months ago, this is again Dmytro Kuleba, to finally deliver them. They are ready. Only the final green light is missing. Whatever the reasons, it's time to do it. We are entering autumn, and on Monday we saw how Russia will act. So that should have been a little bit early. Now, Lithuania, Gabriel Landsbergis' country, standing strong with Ukraine, says their MOD. Today, Lithuania, that's yesterday, delivered loaders, anti-drone systems, folding beds, and other vital military aid. Our unwavering support continues in response to Ukraine's needs in their fight for freedom. That's fantastic. Obviously, a very small country, only has so much they can give. So, as mentioned, forklifts, anti-drone systems, folding beds, other essential military supplies. Since they started the war, Lithuania has contributed over $647 million euros, even more in dollars, in military aid to Ukraine. Good stuff there. Spain is to provide 7 more generators to Ukraine. Their latest aid package to Ukraine includes 7 generators worth €360,000, aimed at mitigating the effects of the Russian attacks on critical infrastructure. Thank you, Spain. We talked about that finish. Let's get it right this time. Grodzika. Something like that. Grodzika. There you go. I don't know what this drone is, but it's interesting that here's an image of a fixed-wing drone that has the capability of doing kind of bombing runs here. 6 bombs being attached to its wings. Incredible how the unmanned systems are really evolving and taking the place of humans. We talked about this a little bit in my live stream earlier. In this case, instead of having a larger plane dropping bombs with a crew of however many, here you have an unmanned aerial drone, a vehicle dropping bombs. Obviously, it's much smaller, not nearly as many, but you know, I guess. Let's think. If you had a bomb, because really, what you'd want is something like an A-10, this American bomber that can just a warthog to just absolutely carpet bomb certain positions of, say, the Russians. Now, you can't do that without air supremacy. They're too vulnerable, and lots of people are still talking about, I've seen, I've heard rumors that A-10s might be on the way to Ukraine. Absolutely not. I don't think it'll ever happen because the airspace is so contested. But what does that do that you could do elsewise? Like, could you have like the bigger your drone, the more easy it is to shoot down, the bigger your target, the easier it is to acquire. So, small drone, lots of times, many bombs. So therefore, it's about making the bombs small but potent. So instead of being able to drop a large amount of large bombs, you can drop a small amount of hopefully small bombs but pack a punch. And maybe is there any kind of R&D that can be put into place for making light bombs lighter but more effective as light bombs? I don't know. Just thinking out loud. But there's your problem. This is a function of X. We need to supplant that. We need to substitute that with Y, or maybe Y and Z and A and B, lots of different things to do the function of that. And this is how we eventually do that. Might not be as efficient, but given that we don't have control of the skies, we have to do these things in other ways. The EU would consider training soldiers in Ukraine should the necessary political and operational conditions be met, according to the EU External Action Service document seen by Politico. This is important, but there's been some talk again within the EU about whether EU countries can provide training within Ukraine for the Ukrainians, training provided by EU member states. So, quote, French President Emmanuel Macron has been open to the idea of training troops in Ukraine backed by countries like Lithuania, but others like Germany are fearful that would escalate tensions with Russia and endanger the lives of Western trainers sent into war-torn Ukraine. It is highly likely that the EU military presence on Ukrainian soil would be perceived by Russia as a provocation, the EU External Action Service document says, and adds that it is, quote, not feasible for the EU to protect any trainers sent to Ukraine. The request to train troops in Ukraine comes from Kiev, and with the document saying The Ukrainian government feels, quote, this is deemed as faster, more cost-effective and logistically easier. Alternatively, training could be conducted in Ukraine's neighbouring countries, which it kind of is to a large degree. So far, EU training has taken place primarily in Poland and Germany. By the end of summer, about 60,000 Ukrainians had undergone training. The EEAS recommends extending UMAM's mandate by 2 years until November 15th, 2026, and exploring the possibility of holding training closer to Ukraine's borders. The document was discussed by ambassadors in the Political and Security Committee on Tuesday, and it's expected to be on the agenda when foreign and defence ministers meet later this week. And we're going to return to, well, actually, Joseph Borrell, I think, has been meeting with those people, and in fact, Joseph Borrell of the EU has been advocating for a lifting of restrictions for Ukraine so that they can hit targets deep into Russia. Now, Lockheed has not yet been contracted by the Department of Defense in the US to help sustain Ukraine's F-16s. They say they could support the training of additional Ukrainian pilots at their new Romanian facility and maintenance in Poland, but haven't been asked. Zero sense of urgency, says Colby Badwar. So again, is there a reason for this? Is maintenance and provision for F-16s being done in other ways so that maybe Lockheed were more expensive? Maybe there's a reason they haven't been asked. Or is this negligence? Should they have been asked? Could things have been achieved better, more efficiently or quicker or whatever? It had Lockheed been contracted to assist the Ukrainians with their F-16s. And an ammunition plant in Pennsylvania, city of Scranton, as we hear a lot, Joe Biden, the old Scranton boy, has implemented a 50% increase in the production of 155mm artillery shells, many of which are sent to Ukraine, government officials said to the press on August the 27th. So there's definitely a ramping up of ammunition. Ammunition is clearly getting made for Ukraine. Complaints are that Ukraine aren't getting enough ammunition, but it's certainly being made to much greater degrees, both in Europe and in the States. Now, moving on to a couple of Russian elements here. So, Moscow police are to be paid a 50,000 ruble, sounds a lot, but that's $558, still pretty good, bounty for each person they, quote, persuade, or I should say scare quotes, to sign up for the military service, including immigrants and homeless people. I'm sure persuade is it does a lot of heavy lifting, should we say. The initiative will create more incentives for corruption for Russia's already notoriously corrupt police, says Chris Owicki. Interior Ministry sources have told the Telegram channel that he refers to a lot that police services in Russia will be incentivized to persuade people to join the armed forces with bounties of 50,000 rubles in Moscow and 10,000 rubles, that's $109 in the regions. According to the Telegram channel, quote, the Interior Ministry employees we interviewed were very skeptical about the innovation so far. There are no known cases of anyone receiving such a bonus. However, all without exception noted that the amount would be a good incentive for ordinary police officers when working, scare quotes, working with the population. According to the interlocutors, men of any status, nationality and citizenship will be counted towards the agitation. A bonus is promised even for contracts with homeless people and stateless persons. Control is entrusted to the heads of departments over the number of those who, under the persuasion of the Interior Ministry employees, agreed to sign a contract with the Defense Ministry. For several months now, department heads have been required to report to the top on the sending of persons under supervision, controlled detainees and other persons to the special military operation. For nearly 2 years now, immigrants in Russia have been facing pressure to join the Russian army. Illegal workers have been detained, often in sweeps of construction sites and checkpoints in metro stations, and told to join the army or be deported. For example, as we've seen at Wildberries, which is the Amazon equivalent, Wildberries warehouses in Russia. The police have played a major role in rounding up migrants, but they have problems of their own with the loss of staff to mobilization, low salaries and poor morale, leading to shortages of police officers across Russia. It's very likely that this initiative is driven by Russia's increasing difficulties in finding new recruits to replace its huge losses in Ukraine. The introduction of bounties may also help to improve the lot of the police by boosting their salaries. However, it also increases the risk that the police, who are already renowned for their corruption, will behave even more corruptly towards the population. It provides a strong incentive to arrest people on false charges simply to intimidate them into joining the army. Again, any kind of nugget like this, any news piece like this, the question is, what does this tell us? Does this does this reflect desperation, or does this reflect an army in a very healthy place and a society in a very healthy place? And I would say it's a former rather than the latter. And finally, apparently Russia is pulling its military contractors out of Burkina Faso. So Burkina Faso actually just had, was it 300 people killed by ISIS or ISIS equivalents in Burkina Faso? So it's a bit of a hotbed of insurgency or Islamic fundamentalism there, but also one of these countries heavily involved in Russian objectives in Africa. Apparently, they pulled out contractors due to the Kursk offensives. So it could be a case that you've got Wagner or equivalents being pulled out from African nations and being brought back to the Kursk Oblast to help defend Russian territory from Ukrainian attacks. And again, what does that tell you about the military situation for Russia? Both of those nuggets would I think lead us further in the direction that Russia is in a spot of bother, should we say, in terms of recruitment. And as desperate as things are for Ukraine, they appear to be more desperate for Russia, but Russia just might have a higher threshold for desperation. And will, in this dangerous game of military chicken, who will flinch first? Will it be Kursk or will it be Pokrovsk for the Ukrainians or for the Russians? Anyway, that's enough from me waffling on. I really do hope this was of interest to you. I might record my geopolitics video right now and then schedule it for release in the middle of the night, just to keep things ticking over in terms of data information. Otherwise, you know, when it's news, of course, if it's a day and a half late, it kind of feels a bit obsolete. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care, guys. Speak soon.